It was a crisp morning at Los Angeles International Airport. The sun bathed the runway in golden light, casting long shadows across the busy tarmac. Inside the terminal, travelers hurried in every direction. Some clutched their boarding passes tightly, while others sipped their overpriced lattes, eyes fixed on the looming departure boards. Conversations blurred together a mixture of excitement, impatience, and exhaustion. But amidst the chaos, there was one corner of the airport that stood in stark contrast to the frenzy of commercial flights. A sleek private jet sat on the tarmac, its silver exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Unlike the crowded terminals, this area was quiet, almost serene, as if reserved for a different kind of traveler. The jet was unmistakable modern, powerful, and carrying the unmistakable mark of innovation. Inside the cabin of this high-tech marvel stood none other than Elon Musk. He wasn't the type to sit idly, and his restless energy was on full display as he paced near the cockpit. Known for his groundbreaking work with Tesla, SpaceX, and countless other ventures, Elon was the embodiment of progress and forward thinking. But today, something felt off. His sharp mind, usually focused on the future, was preoccupied with a question, one that seemed absurd yet impossible to ignore. The source of his unease stood just a few feet away, a young pilot, clean-cut, standing tall in his pristine uniform. Everything about the man seemed polished and professional, from his posture to the way he carried himself. Everything, that is, except for the bold red MAGA hat perched squarely on his head. The hat stood out like a neon sign, its controversial slogan unmistakable, "Make America Great Again." It was the kind of accessory that could spark debates, ignite tempers, and even end relationships in certain circles. And here it was, sitting atop the head of the man responsible for flying Elon Musk, a figure synonymous with progress and controversy in his own right. Elon paused his pacing, his sharp eyes locking onto the pilot. The silence in the cabin was palpable, broken only by the faint hum of the jet systems. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried a weight that could make anyone stop in their tracks. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his words measured but pointed. The air seemed to thicken. The handful of staff members inside the jet exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Everyone knew Elon wasn't one for small talk, and his directness had a way of cutting through pretense. The pilot, however, didn't flinch. His expression remained steady, his posture unwavering. He met Elon's intense gaze with a calm confidence, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "No joke, sir," he replied evenly, his voice steady. For a moment, neither man spoke. The tension in the cabin was almost tangible, like the moment before a storm breaks. Elon's mind raced. Who was this guy? Was he deliberately trying to provoke him? Or was there something deeper behind this bold display? Elon wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he couldn't ignore the symbolism of the hat. To him, it wasn't just an accessory, it represented a mindset, a worldview that seemed diametrically opposed to everything he stood for. Yet, here it was, worn confidently by the man tasked with his safety at 40,000 feet. "I need to understand," Elon said, his voice softer now but still carrying the edge of curiosity. "What are you trying to say with that hat?" The pilot tilted his head slightly, his smile never faltering. "I believe actions speak louder than appearances," he said simply. It was an answer that left more questions than it resolved. Elon studied the man for a long moment, searching for something: arrogance, defiance, or maybe even a hint of mockery. But he found none. The pilot's calm demeanor was disarming, almost unsettling. Around them, the jet's crew remained frozen, unsure how to proceed. One of Elon's assistants, a young woman clutching a tablet, leaned in and whispered, "Sir, should we call for a replacement?" Her tone was cautious, her eyes darting toward the pilot. Elon waved her off, his curiosity now fully piqued. "No," he said firmly. "I want to see where this goes." The pilot nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. "Ready for takeoff whenever you are, Mr. Musk," he said, gesturing toward the cockpit. Elon lingered for a moment longer, his mind spinning with possibilities. He had dealt with countless people over the years, geniuses, dreamers, and skeptics, but this man was different. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the mold. And for Elon, a man who thrived on uncovering the unexpected, this was a puzzle he couldn't resist solving. As he finally took his seat, buckling in for the flight ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning. What no one in the cabin knew, what even Elon himself couldn't yet foresee, was that this moment would lead to revelations far beyond a simple hat. It wasn't about politics, appearances, or even first impressions. This was the start of something extraordinary, and the answers lay just beyond the horizon. As the jet taxied down the runway, the tension in the cabin remained thick. Elon Musk rarely found himself unsettled by anyone, yet something about the young pilot gnawed at him. It wasn't just the hat, though that was the most obvious trigger. It was the confidence, the air of self-assuredness that Jake Rogers carried. He wasn't defensive, nor was he confrontational. Instead, he seemed utterly unbothered, as though he had anticipated every reaction and had already made peace with it. Elon leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming lightly against the armrest. He couldn't resist sneaking another glance toward the cockpit door, now closed. Beyond it, Jake was preparing for takeoff, his hands steady on the controls. For a moment, Elon considered calling the flight off entirely, perhaps letting his staff deal with what he saw as a potential disruption. But something stopped him. "Let's see how this plays out," he muttered under his breath, a wry smile forming on his lips. The engines roared to life, and the jet began its smooth ascent into the sky. Elon's team settled into their seats, their initial unease giving way to quiet conversations and the hum of electronic devices. Yet, Elon couldn't relax. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one tugging him in a different direction. He wasn't a man prone to distractions. Years of building companies and navigating high-stakes situations had taught him to focus on what mattered and dismiss the rest. But this felt different. There was something about Jake, something more than the hat, that demanded his attention. As the jet reached cruising altitude, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rogers speaking. We've reached a cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, and conditions look smooth for the duration of the flight. Feel free to relax, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to let the crew know. Thank you for flying with us." The voice was calm, professional, and devoid of any hint of tension. It was the voice of a man who knew his craft, who had complete control over the situation. "Interesting," Elon murmured, almost to himself. One of his assistants, Sarah, glanced over from her seat. "Everything okay, sir?" she asked, her tone tentative. Elon nodded, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Fine. Just thinking." Sarah hesitated, then returned to her work. She knew better than to press when Elon was in one of his reflective moods. An hour passed. The jet glided smoothly through the air, its engines a low, soothing hum. Most of the passengers were engrossed in their own activities, reading, typing on laptops, or scrolling through their phones. But Elon couldn't shake his curiosity. Finally, he stood and made his way toward the cockpit. The crew watched him pass with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. It wasn't unusual for Elon to want updates on a flight, but this felt different. His movements were deliberate, his expression unreadable. He knocked lightly on the cockpit door, then pushed it open. Jake turned his head slightly, acknowledging Elon's presence with a nod. "Mr. Musk," he said, his tone neutral. "Is everything all right?" Elon stepped inside, taking a moment to study the space. The cockpit was immaculate, every button and dial precisely where it should be. Jake sat confidently at the controls, his hands relaxed yet ready. Mind if I join you for a moment? Elon asked, though it was more of a statement than a question. Not at all, Jake replied, gesturing toward the co-pilot's seat. Elon lowered himself into the chair, his eyes scanning the array of instruments. For a few moments, neither man spoke. The silence was almost comfortable, punctuated only by the occasional beep from the control panel. "You're an interesting man, Captain Rogers," Elon said finally, his gaze shifting to Jake. Jake's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I try not to be boring, sir." Elon chuckled, though his expression quickly grew serious. "I have to ask, why the hat? You had to know it would raise eyebrows, especially on a flight like this." Jake leaned back slightly, his posture still relaxed. "I figured it might," he admitted. "But I believe in standing by what you value, even if it makes people uncomfortable." Elon studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of bravado or insincerity. But Jake's expression remained calm, his eyes steady. "And what exactly do you value?" Elon pressed. Jake's smile widened, though it was far from smug. "That's a big question, sir. But if I had to sum it up, I'd say I value hard work, integrity, and the courage to think for yourself." Elon leaned back, his arms crossed. "Courage to think for yourself," he repeated, almost to himself. "Interesting." For the first time in a long while, Elon found himself intrigued not by a new technology or a groundbreaking idea, but by a person. Jake Rogers was an enigma, and Elon couldn't resist the challenge of unraveling him. The conversation shifted. They spoke about aviation, engineering, and even Elon's latest ventures. Jake's knowledge was impressive, far exceeding what Elon had expected from a commercial pilot. He spoke with ease about propulsion systems, atmospheric conditions, and even the challenges of designing reusable rockets. "You know a lot for someone in your line of work," Elon remarked, his tone curious. Jake shrugged. "I like to learn. You never know when knowledge might come in handy." Elon nodded, his respect for the young man growing with each passing moment. There was something refreshing about Jake, his honesty, his confidence, and his refusal to conform to expectations. As the conversation wound down, Elon stood to leave. "You're an interesting man, Captain Rogers," he said again, this time with a hint of admiration. Jake smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment, sir." As Elon returned to his seat, his mind was already racing with possibilities. Who was Jake Rogers, really? And what secrets did he hold? For the rest of the flight, Elon couldn't help but wonder. Captain Jake Rogers sat confidently in his seat, hands resting lightly on the controls, but the weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. He had flown countless flights, carrying some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world, but today felt different. He could sense the unease permeating the cabin. It wasn't turbulence causing the tension, it was something far less tangible yet equally disruptive. That hat. The bold, red MAGA hat perched on Jake's head seemed to have a gravitational pull of its own, drawing stares, whispers, and judgment. Jake had worn it intentionally, fully aware of the stir it might cause. But as the minutes ticked by, he could feel the unspoken opinions swirling around him, each one adding a layer to the invisible wall separating him from the passengers. In the main cabin, Elon Musk sat surrounded by his team. His posture was relaxed, but his sharp, analytical eyes betrayed the thoughts racing through his mind. Elon was a man who thrived on innovation, progress, and challenging conventions. Yet, here he was, faced with a pilot who had chosen to wear an accessory that, for many, symbolized something entirely opposite to those ideals. His assistants exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah, seated closest to him, leaned toward another member of the team. "What was he thinking, wearing that hat in front of Elon?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the jet's engines. "Does he not realize who he's flying?" another murmured back. "He's about to lose his job." Their words hung in the air, amplifying the already charged atmosphere. Elon remained silent, his eyes fixed on the cockpit door. The man was a genius, a visionary, and yet at this moment, he found himself wrestling with an unfamiliar mix of curiosity and irritation. Finally, unable to resist the pull of the situation, Elon stood and walked toward the cockpit. His movements were deliberate, his presence commanding. Conversations in the cabin died down as heads turned to watch him go. When he reached the cockpit, he paused just outside the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Captain Rogers," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone around him take notice. Jake turned slightly in his seat, his expression neutral but alert. "Yes, Mr. Musk." Elon stepped inside, his tall frame filling the narrow space. He crossed his arms, his piercing gaze locking onto Jake. "Do you understand the kind of message that hat sends?" he asked, his words measured but laden with meaning. Jake didn't flinch. He met Elon's gaze with the same calm confidence he had displayed earlier. "I do, sir," he replied evenly. "But I believe actions speak louder than appearances." The cabin fell silent. The crew members nearby exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Elon Musk, a man known for his sharp intellect and quick wit, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Elon studied Jake, his mind racing. Was this defiance? Arrogance? Or something else entirely? The pilot's demeanor was calm, almost unnervingly so. There was no hint of apology or defensiveness in his tone, only a quiet conviction that left Elon unsettled. After a long moment, Elon spoke again. "You must have known this would draw attention. So why wear it? What are you trying to say?" Jake leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the armrests of his seat. "It's not about saying something, Mr. Musk," he began. "It's about standing by what you believe, even when it's inconvenient. Especially then." Elon's eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "You think this is about belief?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Jake nodded. "I do. Everyone has a story, a perspective. This hat represents mine. But I don't expect it to define me. That's for my actions to do." Elon leaned against the doorframe, his arms still crossed. His expression softened, though the intensity in his eyes remained. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said finally. "Thank you, sir," Jake replied, his voice steady. Elon turned and walked back toward his seat, leaving the cockpit in silence. Jake exhaled slowly, his hands returning to the controls. He knew the conversation wasn't over, not by a long shot. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as Elon returned to his seat. His team exchanged hurried whispers, each person speculating about the interaction they had just witnessed. "What did he say?" Sarah asked, her voice low but urgent. Elon didn't respond immediately. He picked up a glass of water from the tray table in front of him, taking a slow sip before setting it back down. Finally, he spoke, his tone reflective. "He's an interesting man," he said simply. The team fell silent, their curiosity piqued but their questions left unanswered. For the rest of the flight, Elon couldn't shake the exchange from his mind. Jake Rogers had managed to challenge him in a way few people ever had. It wasn't just the hat, it was the man wearing it, the calm conviction with which he carried himself, the unwavering belief in something that went beyond appearances. Elon was used to dealing with people who sought to impress him, who catered to his every whim. Jake, however, was different. He wasn't trying to win favor or prove anything. He was simply himself. And for Elon, that was both intriguing and unsettling. As the jet continued its journey, Elon made a mental note: this wasn't the last time he would speak to Captain Rogers. There was more to this man than met the eye, and Elon was determined to uncover it. The flight continued, but the atmosphere in the cabin remained anything but serene. Elon Musk leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed, deep in thought. For most people, a private jet journey was a luxury time to relax, review plans, or simply disconnect from the world below. But Elon's mind never stopped working, and today, it was consumed by the enigma that was Captain Jake Rogers. What kind of man wears a statement like that in the presence of someone who stands for relentless progress, disruption of norms, and forward-thinking ideals? Elon wasn't offended, not exactly. He was intrigued. And that intrigue gnawed at him. A sudden bump of turbulence interrupted his thoughts, causing a brief ripple of murmurs from his team. Elon barely noticed. His mind was still replaying Jake's words, actions speak louder than appearances. What kind of actions? Sarah, his assistant, couldn't stay silent any longer. She leaned in, her voice cautious but curious. Sir, do you think he meant to provoke you? Elon turned his head slightly, considering her question. I don't think so, he replied after a moment. But he's not here to blend in either. The ambiguity of his statement left Sarah puzzled, but she didn't press further. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Jake was the picture of calm. His hands moved deftly over the controls, his focus unwavering. Flying was his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world faded into the background. Yet, even he couldn't entirely ignore the charged energy emanating from the cabin behind him. He had expected reactions, confusion, maybe even hostility. But he hadn't anticipated Elon Musk himself stepping into the cockpit to question him. That was a curveball, even for someone who thrived under pressure. Jake glanced at his reflection in the small mirror mounted above the controls. The hat, its bright red letters stark against the muted tones of the cockpit, stood out like a beacon. It wasn't about politics, not entirely. For Jake, the hat represented something more personal, a commitment to standing firm in his beliefs, even when it wasn't easy. And if there was one thing Jake Rogers believed in, it was integrity. Back in the cabin, Elon's curiosity grew with each passing mile. He found himself opening his laptop, not to review his agenda or respond to emails, but to search for any mention of Captain Jake Rogers. Was this man just another pilot, or was there more to his story? The results were sparse at first. Jake had a surprisingly low profile for someone in his profession. But one article caught Elon's eye, a small feature from a regional newspaper. The headline read, "Local pilot receives commendation for heroic landing." Elon clicked the link, his interest piqued. The article detailed an incident from 3 years earlier when Jake had safely landed a malfunctioning commercial flight, saving over 200 passengers. The airline had praised his quick thinking and composure under pressure, calling it an extraordinary display of skill and leadership. Elon sat back, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. So, he's not just bold, he murmured. He's good. The discovery only deepened Elon's curiosity. What drove a man like Jake Rogers? What experiences had shaped him, and what had led him to don that hat, fully aware of the attention it would draw? As the jet cruised above the clouds, Elon made a decision. He needed to know more. He stood abruptly, startling Sarah and a few others nearby. Without a word, he walked back toward the cockpit. Jake heard the soft knock on the door and called out, "Come in." Elon stepped inside, this time with a different energy. He wasn't there to challenge, he was there to learn. "Captain Rogers," he began, his tone lighter than before. "Do you mind if I ask you a few more questions?" Jake glanced at him briefly, then returned his focus to the controls. "As long as it doesn't interfere with the flight, sir, ask away." Elon pulled the co-pilot's seat closer and sat down. "I did some reading," he said. "That landing you pulled off a few years ago, that was impressive." Jake's lips curved into a faint smile. "Thank you. Just doing my job." "Most people wouldn't call that just a job," Elon countered. "You saved a lot of lives." Jake shrugged modestly. It's what any trained pilot would have done in the same situation. Elon studied him, searching for any hint of arrogance or false humility. But Jake's demeanor remained steady, his confidence rooted in something genuine. You're a hard man to read, Elon admitted. Most people want to make an impression. You seem content just being yourself. Jake chuckled softly. Life's simpler that way. For the next half hour, the two men talked, their conversation weaving between aviation, leadership, and the principles that guided them. Elon found himself impressed not just by Jake's knowledge but by his perspective. Let me ask you something, Elon said, leaning forward. Why do you do it? Why fly private jets instead of staying with commercial airlines? You could probably work for any company you want. Jake hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. I like the challenge, he said finally. Every flight's different. And here, I get to meet people from all walks of life. Keeps me sharp. Elon nodded, sensing there was more to the answer but deciding not to push. As the conversation wound down, Elon stood to leave. But before he did, he turned back to Jake. One last thing, he said. That hat it's more than just a statement, isn't it? Jake met his gaze, his expression unreadable. It is, he said simply. Elon nodded slowly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I thought so. The jet sliced through the morning sky, steady and sure, but inside the cabin, the air was charged with an almost electric tension. Elon Musk sat at his seat, arms crossed, a thoughtful frown creasing his face. His mind was still replaying the brief exchange with Captain Jake Rogers, the pilot who seemed to hold his ground so effortlessly under scrutiny. Elon wasn't used to being caught off guard. Yet here he was, grappling with a nagging curiosity that refused to let go. There was something about Jake, something unusual. It wasn't just the hat, although that alone was bold enough. No, it was the man behind it, his calm confidence, his steady gaze, and, above all, his cryptic nature. Elon's thoughts were interrupted as the jet hit a patch of mild turbulence. Most passengers hardly noticed, but Elon, ever the observer, noticed something peculiar. From his seat in the cabin, he had a clear view of the cockpit, and he saw Jake adjust a series of controls with precision that bordered on artistry. Interesting, Elon muttered under his breath. Jake's voice came over the intercom a moment later. Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a slight pocket of turbulence. Nothing to worry about, it'll smooth out shortly. The voice was steady, calm, reassuring. Elon felt a grudging respect. Most pilots could handle turbulence, sure, but Jake's tone carried an extra layer of confidence. It was as though he wasn't just reacting to the turbulence, he understood it on a fundamental level. Elon leaned back in his seat, but his curiosity only grew. Over the next hour, Elon started to notice more subtle details. During a lull in the flight, Jake emerged from the cockpit to check on the passengers. As he moved through the aisle, Elon watched him closely. Jake's posture was unflinchingly straight, his movements deliberate but unhurried. When he stopped to answer a question from a flight attendant, his response was concise but carried a depth of knowledge that made Elon sit up straighter. Elon's sharp ears picked up part of the exchange. The flight attendant had asked about a minor adjustment in cabin pressure, and Jake's explanation, though simple, hinted at a thorough understanding of engineering and aerodynamics. Cabin pressure fluctuation like that often happens when there's a minor temperature differential outside, Jake had said. It's a natural response in pressurized aircraft. Nothing to worry about. Elon's brow furrowed. Most pilots would have given a generic reassurance. Jake's explanation had the precision of someone who lived and breathed these mechanics. As the flight continued, Elon noticed Jake glancing at a copy of a book left on a nearby tray, Principles of Space Propulsion Systems. It wasn't unusual for a pilot to have an interest in such topics, But when Jake casually flipped to a page marked with a sticky note and jotted down a quick formula in the margins, Elon's curiosity spiked. "Do you study propulsion systems in your free time?" Elon asked aloud, his tone half curious, half skeptical. Jake looked up from the book, not startled in the slightest. He smiled faintly. "I like to stay informed," he said simply, his tone offering no further explanation. Elon didn't let it go. "Informed about what?" "I've read that book." "That's not light reading for most pilots." Jake's smile widened, but he didn't answer directly. "I've always been fascinated by how things work, Mr. Musk. Especially the things most people take for granted, like the way we defy gravity at 40,000 feet. Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued but unsatisfied. "Interesting choice of words," he remarked. Jake just nodded, his expression unreadable, before turning back toward the cockpit. Later, Elon decided to engage Jake directly. He pressed the call button at his seat, signaling for Jake to join him. When Jake appeared, Elon wasted no time. "Captain Rogers," he began, "I've met a lot of people who are good at their jobs. But you're more than that, aren't you?" Jake tilted his head slightly, his expression remaining neutral. "I'm just a pilot doing his job, sir." Elon leaned forward, his sharp gaze narrowing. "No, you're not. I've seen pilots before. You're different. You have the mind of an engineer, not just someone who flies planes. The way you handle turbulence, the way you explain things, most people don't talk like that unless they built something themselves. So, tell me, who are you, really?" For a moment, Jake hesitated, his eyes flickering with something Elon couldn't quite place. Finally, he responded, his voice steady. "I'm exactly who you think I am, a pilot. But I also believe in knowing the tools of my trade better than anyone else." Elon tapped his fingers on the armrest, clearly unconvinced. "And yet, you seem to know a lot about spaceflight. That's not exactly standard knowledge for an airline pilot." Jake smiled faintly. "I guess you could say I have a personal interest in the subject." "A personal interest?" Elon repeated, his curiosity only deepening. Jake met his gaze, his expression calm but unyielding. "Let's just say I believe in staying prepared for every possibility. You never know when knowledge will come in handy." The cryptic answer only fueled Elon's determination to uncover the truth. As the flight neared its destination, Elon found himself poring over his laptop, searching for any mention of Jake Rogers. He found the same article about the heroic landing he had read earlier, but as he dug deeper, he began to piece together a mosaic of clues. Jake had a background in mechanical engineering, it seemed, though he rarely talked about it. He had also once worked as a consultant for a small aerospace firm, an obscure detail buried in an old LinkedIn profile. What stood out most, however, was Jake's pattern of employment. He had switched between several high-profile aviation companies before settling into private aviation. Each position hinted at a man with an insatiable curiosity and a talent for solving complex problems. Elon closed his laptop and leaned back, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're full of surprises, Captain Rogers," he murmured. When the jet finally landed, Elon made his way toward the cockpit once more. This time, he wasn't there to challenge Jake but to understand him. As Jake powered down the engines and performed his post-flight checks, Elon lingered in the doorway. "Captain Rogers," he said, his tone softer than before. Jake turned to face him, his expression calm. "Yes, Mr. Musk." Elon studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You intrigue me. You're not just a pilot, you're a puzzle. And I don't like leaving puzzles unsolved." Jake's lips quirked into a small smile. "Maybe some puzzles aren't meant to be solved right away." Elon laughed lightly, the sound genuine. "Fair enough. But something tells me we're not done here. I'll be seeing you again, Captain." Jake inclined his head, his smile faint but unmistakable. "I have no doubt, sir." As Elon stepped off the jet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Captain Jake Rogers was more than he seemed, and Elon Musk wasn't one to let mysteries go unanswered. Here's the continuation of the rising action and small revelations section, expanding it toward a 5,000-word length while keeping a suspenseful and engaging tone. The drive back to the office was uneventful for Elon. Or at least, that's how it appeared to the rest of his team. Inside his mind, however, questions swirled like a storm. Who was Jake Rogers? The man was undeniably skilled. His control of the aircraft alone spoke volumes. But it wasn't just his talent as a pilot that intrigued Elon. It was the subtleties, the way Jake carried himself, the layers of knowledge he revealed in fleeting moments. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than he let on. By the time Elon reached his desk, his curiosity had morphed into something more akin to obsession. He needed answers. Elon spent hours combing through public records, news articles, and anything else he could find online. He was no stranger to digging deep. Years of running companies had taught him the art of uncovering hidden details. Jake Rogers' resume, at first glance, seemed straightforward: a solid career in aviation, a stint in aerospace consulting, and a commendation for heroism during an emergency landing. But as Elon dug deeper, he began to notice patterns. Jake's consulting work wasn't just at any aerospace firm, it was at a company Elon had crossed paths with years ago. A small startup specializing in experimental propulsion systems. The name of the company sent a jolt through Elon's memory. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "So, Captain Rogers," he murmured aloud, "you're not just a pilot after all." The next day, Elon was scheduled for another flight, this time to an investor meeting across the country. To his surprise, when he boarded the jet, Jake was there again, standing at the entrance with his usual composed demeanor. "Good morning, Mr. Musk," Jake said with a nod. Elon stopped in his tracks, studying Jake for a long moment. "You again," he said, his tone carrying a mix of surprise and intrigue. Jake didn't flinch. "It seems so." Elon raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. As he took his seat, he couldn't help but wonder if this was mere coincidence or something more deliberate. As the jet soared through the sky, Elon found himself watching Jake more closely than ever. Every movement, every word seemed to carry weight. At one point, Jake walked through the cabin, checking in with the passengers. Elon seized the opportunity. "Captain Rogers," he called out, gesturing for Jake to join him. Jake approached, his expression neutral. "Yes, sir." Elon leaned forward, his voice low. "I did some research on you." Jake didn't seem surprised. If anything, his faint smile suggested he had expected this. "I see," Jake said. "You worked for Axion Aerospace," Elon continued, watching for a reaction. "I remember them. They were working on some pretty ambitious projects, things most people wouldn't even dream of." Jake's smile widened slightly. "They were ambitious, yes. But sometimes ambition is necessary to push boundaries." Elon nodded slowly. "And yet, you left. Why?" Jake's expression didn't waver. "Let's just say I realized my path was leading me elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" Elon pressed. "Or did something happen?" For a moment, Jake's calm mask slipped, and a flicker of something pain crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I suppose you could say it was a bit of both," Jake said finally. Later in the flight, turbulence struck again, this time more severe than before. As the plane rocked, Elon noticed Jake's calm demeanor in the cockpit. When the turbulence passed, Elon decided he couldn't wait any longer. He made his way to the cockpit and knocked lightly on the door frame. Jake glanced over his shoulder. "Is everything all right, Mr. Musk?" "Everything's fine," Elon said, stepping inside. "I just wanted to ask you something." Jake turned in his seat, one hand still resting on the controls. "Go ahead." "Why do you fly?" Elon asked bluntly. The question seemed to catch Jake off guard. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, he let out a quiet chuckle. "Why do I fly?" Jake repeated. "That's a good question." Elon waited, sensing there was more. Jake leaned back slightly, his gaze thoughtful. "Flying gives me freedom. It's one of the few places where everything else fades away, and it's just you, the machine, and the sky." Elon nodded, but his curiosity remained unsatisfied. "And yet, you seem like someone who could be doing so much more. Engineering, innovation, you clearly have the mind for it. So why stick to the cockpit?" Jake's eyes met Elon's, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in his expression. "Maybe because sometimes the cockpit is the only place where you can find peace." As the flight neared its destination, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that he was only scratching the surface of Jake's story. When the jet landed, Elon lingered, waiting for the other passengers to disembark. Finally, it was just him and Jake. Elon approached the cockpit once more. "Captain Rogers," he said, his tone softer this time. Jake turned to face him. "Yes, Mr. Musk." Elon studied him for a long moment. "You're hiding something," he said quietly. "I don't know what it is yet, but I will." Jake's faint smile returned. "Maybe you will," he said simply. Elon nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I'll see you again, Captain." Jake inclined his head. "I have no doubt." As Elon stepped off the jet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Jake Rogers was more than he appeared to be, and Elon Musk wasn't one to let a mystery go unsolved. The ballroom lights dimmed as a large screen behind the podium flickered to life. Images of advanced spacecraft, schematics, and bold scientific headlines filled the screen. Words like revolutionary propulsion systems and game-changing innovation flashed before the audience. Elon leaned forward in his chair, his curiosity piqued. He had heard whispers of a major breakthrough in propulsion technology but had dismissed them as overhyped rumors. Now, it seemed, the whispers had a face, and that face was Jake Rogers. Jake adjusted the microphone, his confident posture commanding the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I stand here today not as a pilot or a uniformed figure in the background, but as someone who believes in pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible." Elon's eyes narrowed as he leaned closer. Jake wasn't just presenting, he was captivating the room. Jake continued, his tone steady but laced with passion. "Years ago, I had a vision of propulsion systems that could reduce travel time to Mars by half, systems that would make interstellar exploration a reality within our lifetimes." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. Jake gestured toward the screen, where a sleek diagram of a spacecraft appeared. "What you see behind me is the culmination of that vision, the Phoenix Drive." Gasps rippled through the room as the diagram rotated, showcasing an advanced propulsion system unlike anything anyone had seen before. Elon's jaw tightened. He recognized elements of the design concepts he himself had explored years ago but had deemed too ambitious to pursue. "This system," Jake continued, "utilizes a hybrid of plasma and quantum field manipulation. In simple terms, it's faster, more efficient, and most importantly within reach." Elon exchanged glances with a colleague. "Plasma and quantum fields," he whispered. "That's not just ambitious, it's revolutionary." Jake took a step back from the podium, letting the gravity of his words settle over the crowd. Then, with a faint smile, he said, "Some of you may be wondering how I ended up here. After all, to most of you, I'm just Captain Rogers, a pilot." Elon felt a pang of recognition. Jake's gaze shifted, meeting his directly for the briefest of moments. "But appearances," Jake said, his voice firm, are often deceiving. He paused, then added, years ago, I had the privilege of working with one of the most innovative companies in aerospace, Axion Aerospace. Elon straightened in his seat. The pieces were falling into place. It was there, Jake continued, that I began to develop the foundational concepts for the Phoenix Drive. But as with any bold idea, there were challenges. Funding ran dry, and I was forced to step away from the project. He took a deep breath. I could have given up. But instead, I chose a different path, one that allowed me to learn, to grow, and to refine my vision. Even if that meant stepping into a cockpit instead of a lab. The room erupted in applause, but Jake raised a hand, signaling for silence. His expression turned serious. But there's more to this story, he said. Because innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It requires collaboration. It requires visionaries who are willing to take risks. He turned toward Elon, his gaze steady. And it requires people like Mr. Elon Musk. The spotlight shifted to Elon, who froze for a moment before standing. He gave a small wave, his expression a mix of surprise and respect. Mr. Musk, Jake said, addressing him directly, whether you realize it or not, your work has inspired countless people, myself included. Your belief in pushing boundaries paved the way for ideas like the Phoenix Drive. For that, I thank you. The room burst into applause again, this time louder and more sustained. Elon felt a flush of warmth and a hint of humility. Jake wasn't finished. As the applause died down, he stepped closer to the edge of the stage. But inspiration, he said, is only the beginning. True progress requires action. And that's why I'm here today. He gestured toward the screen, where the words "The Next Frontier" appeared. The Phoenix Drive is ready for its next phase. But to bring this technology to life, we need collaboration. We need bold thinkers who are willing to join us on this journey. His eyes locked with Elon's. And that includes you, Mr. Musk. A murmur spread through the audience. Elon's colleagues turned to him, their faces alight with anticipation. Elon remained standing, his mind racing. This wasn't just a presentation, it was an invitation. After the event, as guests mingled and discussed the presentation, Elon made his way to Jake. The crowd parted, sensing an important conversation about to unfold. When Elon reached Jake, he extended his hand. "Captain Rogers," he said, a genuine smile breaking across his face, "or should I say, Engineer Rogers." Jake chuckled, shaking Elon's hand. "Jake is fine. I have to admit," Elon said, his tone light, "you had me fooled. You're not just a pilot, you're a pioneer." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "And you're not just a billionaire, you're a dreamer. That's why I wanted you here tonight." Elon raised an eyebrow. "You planned this, didn't you?" Jake's smile widened. "Let's just say I saw an opportunity to connect." As the two men talked, their conversation grew deeper, shifting from polite exchanges to passionate discussions about the future of space exploration. Jake shared more details about the Phoenix Drive, while Elon offered insights from his own experiences at SpaceX. By the end of the night, it was clear to both of them that this wasn't just a chance encounter, it was the beginning of a partnership. "You know," Elon said with a grin, "I don't often admit when I'm wrong. But I misjudged you, Jake." Jake laughed. "You're not the first." Elon's smile turned thoughtful. "Let's change that. Together." As Jake and Elon talked, their conversation began to draw attention. People nearby leaned in to catch snippets, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. The whispers of the crowd were audible now. "Is this really happening? Musk and Rogers, side by side. They could revolutionize everything if they worked together." Jake noticed the attention and lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer to Elon. "You see," he said, "this wasn't just about unveiling the Phoenix Drive. It's about proving a point. People are too quick to judge by appearances, by affiliations, by anything but what really matters, vision and action. Elon's eyes flickered with understanding. You're right. And maybe I needed that reminder myself. Jake nodded. We all do, sometimes. But not everyone in the room was as enthusiastic about the possibility of collaboration. A few high-ranking officials in attendance exchanged wary glances. Among them was Dr. Elaine Harper, a senior NASA scientist who had worked on competing propulsion technologies. Harper approached the duo with a forced smile. Captain Rogers, she said, her tone measured, that was quite the presentation. But don't you think you're oversimplifying things? The technology you propose, it's untested, theoretical at best. Jake met her gaze, his expression calm but resolute. Dr. Harper, every breakthrough starts as an untested theory. That's why it's called innovation. The room went quiet again, the tension palpable. Elon watched the exchange, his interest growing. He had been in Jake's position many times defending bold ideas against skeptics. Later that evening, Jake found himself cornered by another attendee, a former colleague from Axion Aerospace. This man, Dr. Victor Lane, had once been a key figure in the same research group as Jake. But unlike Jake, Lane had stayed behind when the project dissolved. Well, Lane said with a smirk, look who's back in the spotlight. Still chasing those wild dreams, Jake? Jake didn't flinch. Dreams are only wild until they come true, Victor. Lane chuckled, shaking his head. You always had a knack for theatrics. But let me ask you this, do you really think Musk is going to take you seriously? He's a pragmatist. He won't bet on someone who's spent the last few years flying planes instead of running labs. Elon, who had overheard the conversation, stepped forward. Actually, he said, his voice cutting through the air, I think Jake has something most people in this room lack, grit. He's not just talking about change, he's living it. Lane opened his mouth to respond, but Elon raised a hand, silencing him. And for the record, Elon added, I've bet on crazier ideas before. They tend to work out. The tension eased as the evening wore on, and Jake found himself approached by a surprising figure, Dr. Harper, the same NASA scientist who had questioned him earlier. Captain Rogers, she began, her tone softer this time, I have to admit, your presentation made me think. Maybe I've been too focused on what's proven and not enough on what's possible. Jake smiled. It's never too late to change the way you see things, Dr. Harper. She nodded, then extended a hand. If you're serious about the Phoenix Drive, I'd like to contribute. NASA has resources that could help you refine your design. Jake shook her hand, gratitude evident in his eyes. Thank you. Collaboration is exactly what this project needs. By the end of the night, the event had transformed into more than just a showcase for the Phoenix Drive. It was a gathering of minds, a crossroads where skeptics, dreamers, and innovators met to forge a new path forward. Elon, now fully convinced of Jake's potential, made a bold offer. Jake, he said, how would you feel about working directly with SpaceX? I have the facilities, the team, and the funding to bring the Phoenix Drive to life. Jake hesitated, the weight of the offer sinking in. That's an incredible opportunity, he said. But I need to make sure this project stays true to its vision. This isn't just about profit, it's about progress for humanity. Elon nodded, his respect for Jake growing. Agreed. Let's make it happen on your terms. The partnership between Jake Rogers and Elon Musk became the talk of the aerospace industry. Articles and headlines hailed it as a historic moment, likening it to the collaborations of legendary scientists and inventors of the past. But for Jake and Elon, the real work was just beginning. Late nights in the lab, heated debates over designs, and countless simulations became their new normal. Through it all, Jake's determination never wavered, and neither did Elon's. As the first prototype of the Phoenix drive neared completion, the two men stood side by side, watching as engineers prepared for a critical test. "You know," Elon said, glancing at Jake, "this might just be the craziest thing I've ever done." Jake grinned. "Welcome to my world." The night of the event felt like a turning point in the lives of both Elon and Jake. As the applause had faded and the crowd began to disperse, a moment of quiet reflection settled between the two men. The conversations, the debates, and the doubts had all been answered in that room. The world had witnessed not only the unveiling of groundbreaking technology but also the birth of a new partnership, one that promised to change the future of space exploration. Elon and Jake walked out of the ballroom side by side. The cool night air hit them as they stepped into a sleek car waiting to take them to the airport. The weight of the evening's events hung in the air between them, but there was a shared understanding now. They were no longer just two individuals with different goals, they were part of something bigger, a collaboration that could reshape the future. As they settled into the back seat, Elon turned to Jake with a smile. "You know, you could have told me sooner. I might have taken you more seriously." Jake's lips curled into a small, knowing grin. "Where's the fun in that? Sometimes, people need to see for themselves. It's one thing to tell someone what you can do, but it's another to show them." Elon laughed softly, admiring the quiet confidence in Jake's words. There was wisdom in his approach, something that Elon had always valued in the people he worked with. He had learned long ago that real progress came not from simply having ideas, but from taking bold steps to make them a reality even when it meant challenging the status quo. From that moment on, Jake's life changed in ways he never imagined. What had started as a simple flight, a small meeting with Elon Musk, quickly grew into something far more significant. Elon invited Jake to become a core part of SpaceX's advanced propulsion team. His knowledge, expertise, and unique perspective on aerospace engineering made him an invaluable addition to the company. Elon, despite his usual confidence, had underestimated Jake at first. He had judged him based on his appearance, his uniform, and the simple hat Jake had worn that day. But what Elon came to realize was that Jake wasn't just another pilot. He was a visionary, someone with a deep understanding of technology and a passion for pushing boundaries. The more they worked together, the clearer it became that Jake's insights were exactly what SpaceX needed to take their missions to the next level. At first, Jake felt like an outsider in the high-tech world of SpaceX. He was used to the cockpit, to navigating through the skies with nothing but his wits and experience. But now, he was immersed in the fast-paced, cutting-edge world of space engineering. The learning curve was steep, but Jake wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. He dove in head first, often staying late into the night working on designs and concepts for the Phoenix drive, a propulsion system he knew had the potential to change everything. Elon supported him every step of the way. "We're in this together," Elon would say, encouraging Jake to keep pushing forward even when things seemed impossible. And with each new breakthrough, with each success, Jake felt the weight of the world's expectations slowly lifting. This was no longer about proving himself, it was about creating something that could change the course of history. Months passed, and the prototype for the Phoenix drive neared completion. The team had worked tirelessly, perfecting every detail. The excitement in the air was palpable as the day of the first test arrived. Engineers, scientists, and even journalists gathered at the launch site, their eyes focused on the sleek spacecraft that stood ready for its inaugural flight. Jake stood at the edge of the platform, his heart racing. This was the moment. The culmination of years of work, the vision he had fought for, and the belief that the impossible was possible. Elon stood beside him, equally eager, but with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen his share of ambitious projects. "This is it," Elon said, his voice low but filled with anticipation. "I've seen you work, Jake. I've seen you push everyone here to think bigger, to dream harder. Today, we prove it." Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the spacecraft. We prove that the future of space exploration is here. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Each number felt like an eternity. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, the tension building. As the clock ticked down, there was no turning back. This test wasn't just about a new propulsion system, it was about proving the naysayers wrong, showing the world that true innovation could come from unexpected places. The engines roared to life. The spacecraft shuddered and then shot forward, leaving a trail of light in its wake. For the first time in history, a spacecraft powered by the Phoenix drive surged into the atmosphere, breaking barriers that had once seemed unthinkable. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake's hands trembled slightly, but there was a sense of relief and pride washing over him. Elon clapped him on the back. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Jake smiled, but he knew this was only the beginning. The test flight had been a success, but there was still much work to be done. This was the first step toward a future where space exploration was no longer limited by the old constraints. The successful test flight of the Phoenix drive sent shockwaves through the aerospace industry. Headlines flooded the news: Musk and Rogers unveil breakthrough propulsion system, and SpaceX's Phoenix drive could cut travel time to Mars by half. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. The idea that space travel could be faster, more efficient, and more feasible had long been a dream, but now it was becoming a reality. Jake, once a pilot in a uniform with little recognition, was now a hero in the eyes of many. He was invited to conferences, interviewed by news outlets, and even honored with awards for his contribution to space exploration. But for Jake, none of the accolades mattered as much as the knowledge that they were on the verge of something truly extraordinary. As Jake's success grew, so did his reputation. No longer seen as just a pilot or a man defined by his past, he had earned the respect of the scientific community, the industry, and most importantly himself. The idea that he had been underestimated, judged by his appearance, and dismissed by so many became a distant memory. Justice, in a sense, had been served. Jake's talent had been recognized, not because he had sought validation, but because he had delivered. He had proven that true worth cannot be measured by superficial judgments. It's about what you do, how you think, and what you contribute to the world. And while the journey had been long and often difficult, Jake knew that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had been worth it. He had found an ally in Elon Musk, a mentor who had believed in him, and together they had changed the landscape of space exploration forever. As Jake stood on the balcony of a SpaceX facility years later, watching the rockets launch into the sky, he felt a sense of peace. The Phoenix drive had become the standard for all future missions, and humanity was now one step closer to colonizing other planets. The impossible was no longer out of reach, it was becoming reality. He turned to Elon, who stood beside him, looking at the stars. "I couldn't have done it without you," Jake said, his voice soft but sincere. Elon smiled, his eyes still focused on the horizon. "You did the hard part, Jake. You proved that nothing is impossible when you refuse to give up." Jake smiled back, knowing that this was just the beginning of an even greater journey. And for the first time, he felt like he had finally found his place in the universe. As the world learned about Jake Rogers and the remarkable journey that had led him to this point, it quickly became clear that his story wasn't just about a single event or moment. It was more than about the red MAGA hat, more than about proving Elon Musk wrong, or about winning any personal victory. It was about defying expectations, shattering stereotypes, and rising above the assumptions others had placed upon him. When people looked back on Jake's life, they saw a man who had never been given a fair chance. His quiet demeanor, his humble beginnings, and yes, even his choice of clothing something as simple as a hat had been enough to make people dismiss him. But through it all, Jake had stayed true to himself. He had never let the opinions of others define who he was or what he could achieve. For years, Jake had known something others hadn't, that brilliance doesn't always announce itself in the loudest way. It doesn't need the applause or the spotlight. Sometimes, true brilliance is quiet, steady, and hidden beneath the surface. It's the kind of brilliance that doesn't show off or demand attention, but when it is finally revealed, it leaves everyone in awe. Jake's story became a living testament to that idea. He had started as just another pilot in a uniform, the kind of person people might overlook without a second thought. But over time, people began to realize that he was much more than that. His knowledge, his ingenuity, and his unwavering commitment to progress had always been there, it just took the right moment to bring it to light. It wasn't just Jake who had underestimated his potential. So had the world. He was often judged by the surface, by his job, by his appearance, by his past. People didn't see the visionary engineer beneath the pilot's uniform. They didn't see the brilliant mind that could revolutionize the way humanity traveled in space. They didn't know about the countless hours Jake had spent reading, studying, and dreaming. They didn't understand the ambition that burned inside him, or the courage it took to keep going when no one believed in him. Jake had always known that people would judge him, but he never let it stop him. Instead, he used it as fuel. He turned their doubt into his determination. Every moment they wrote him off, he pushed harder. Every time someone looked at him with skepticism, he dug deeper into his passion. He didn't need validation from others. He only needed to prove it to himself. And that's exactly what he did. With every idea, every breakthrough, every risk he took, Jake showed the world that brilliance doesn't look like anything in particular. It can come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. It doesn't need to fit into society's narrow expectations. It just needs the right environment, the right opportunities, and the courage to be seen for what it truly is. Jake's journey wasn't just about breaking his own personal barriers, it was about breaking the barriers that the world had built around him. It was a reminder that society often places people into boxes, labeling them based on their job, their background, or even their appearance. It's easy to make assumptions, to judge someone based on first impressions, but Jake proved that those judgments are often completely wrong. His story serves as a powerful lesson for all of us. It reminds us not to make assumptions about the people we meet. We don't know their full story, their struggles, or their dreams. We don't know what's hidden beneath the surface. We don't know what potential they might have or what they might achieve if given the chance. It's easy to fall into the trap of judging others too quickly. We might dismiss someone because of how they dress or where they come from. But Jake's story teaches us that the most extraordinary individuals often come from the most unexpected places. We should never judge someone based on appearances or preconceived notions. Instead, we should give people a chance to prove themselves, to show what they can do, and to offer their unique contributions to the world. The truth is, greatness doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It doesn't always fit into the mold we imagine. Jake's rise to success wasn't about defying Elon Musk or proving anyone wrong, it was about showing the world that when you stay true to your purpose, when you keep pushing forward, and when you don't let others' expectations define you, anything is possible. By the time Jake became an integral part of the SpaceX team, helping to design a revolutionary propulsion system, the world had seen just a glimpse of what he was capable of. But to him, it was only the beginning. He hadn't worked this hard, taken on this much, just for recognition or applause. He had done it because he knew it was what he was meant to do. When you rise above what people expect of you, it's not just about proving them wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Jake's journey was never about showing people they were wrong for doubting him, it was about showing himself that he could do what others thought impossible. It was about proving that the only limits we face are the ones we place on ourselves. And by pushing beyond those limits, Jake showed the world what true success looks like. The most inspiring part of Jake's story was not the fact that he had overcome the odds or proved people wrong. It was that he had stayed humble through it all. Despite everything he had accomplished, he never let the fame or the recognition change who he was. He remained grounded, focused on the future, and determined to keep pushing the boundaries of what could be achieved. Jake's humility, his quiet confidence, and his unwavering belief in his own abilities became his defining qualities. He didn't need to boast or show off, his actions spoke for themselves. And in the end, that's what made his success so inspiring. He didn't just change the world, he did it on his own terms, in his own way. The legacy of Jake Rogers is more than just about the Phoenix Drive, or the role he played in transforming space travel. His true legacy is the inspiration he leaves behind. He showed the world that greatness doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be flashy. Greatness is about quiet persistence, about sticking with your vision even when no one else believes in it. It's about seeing beyond the surface, pushing through adversity, and being willing to bet on yourself even when everyone else counts you out. Jake's story is a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever been underestimated or overlooked. It's a reminder that the world doesn't always see our potential, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. It's a call to rise above the assumptions, to chase your dreams no matter how impossible they may seem, and to never let anyone define who you are or what you can achieve. As the years go by, Jake's impact on the world will continue to be felt. He'll be remembered not just as a brilliant engineer or a key figure in space exploration, but as a symbol of resilience and determination. His story will inspire generations to come, showing them that no dream is too big and no person is too small to make a difference. In the end, true brilliance shines brightest when people least expect it. Just like Jake, we all have the power to rise above the expectations set by others and show the world what we're truly capable of. All it takes is the courage to be ourselves and the determination to keep going, no matter the obstacles in our path. And so, Jake Rogers' journey proves one thing above all else: greatness doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from within. And when you believe in yourself, there's nothing that can stop you from achieving the impossible.